make sure you insert this so-called drawing canvas. Okay, so very important ni siya before you insert the shape. Make a canvas. Okay, so after inserting a canvas, makabantay mo murag nay box dira nga maporma. Okay, which is of course if you click outside, the box is gone. So it means it is a non-printable object. Again, if I click this, the box again is selected. In that box, anha niya ninyo i-insert ang inyuhang shape nga ganahan buhaton. So let's just say let's create a simple asa naman tong pinaka basic nila diri nga shape kanina lang. Okay, so insert pataog another shape, your parallelogram. Okay, so again insert na pud taglaing shape which is your process, the rectangle. Okay, so let's say something like this. Now when you do add the arrow, as you can see, again, my shapes are inside the drawing canvas. Makabantay mo as I move my cursor padung sa shape, nay nanggawas nga kaning mga gagmay nga circle. It's like a connector, okay, that allows you to connect your arrow from this shape to this shape. Kung makabantay mo guys, nana ng green dot dira. Okay, sa ato ang arrow. So again, things that you could do with your outline, you can change the thickness, okay, just like any other editing application. Okay, now the good thing about this, putting it inside a canvas, is that when you try to move your shape, your arrow now moves together with it. Okay, so inganaon na siya pag-create ang imuhang flowchart when you are using Microsoft Word. So again, before inserting any shape, make sure you have created a drawing canvas and you insert your shape inside the canvas. Okay? So kana lang sa mga some tips later when we will be having our exam. Okay? Para nindot na pud tan-awon ang inyuhang flowchart. So since nag-practice pa man mo first, I only allowed you to write it first. Okay? So mo na ni siya guys. Okay, ang ato ang flowchart. So sa kasa pa na nimo ipangbutang, okay, magsunod-sunod na ang linya, di na ka mamroblema. Okay, sa imong placement. Okay. So probably you'll be using that for our project, okay? Sa documentation yan ninyo when you create your program, okay? But during exam, I would still be requiring you to make use of your pen, pencil, and paper, okay? I-draw by hand lang nato, okay? Para panigurado. Okay, since this is a digital copy, it can be replicated easily, okay? Nya, looy kayo ang uban, ma-pressure niya ba? Okay? Sa ilahang kauban nga daw limbs lang. Okay? So, para malikayan, okay, ang kanang pagpangopya, atoan lang ihimong mandatory nga paper and pen ang ato ang flowcharting activities or quizzes baron. Okay, so again, those are the tools, guys, that you can use. Pwede mo offline using Word. And you can also use this, Draw.io or app.diagrams.net, okay, for creating your flowchart. Okay? So again, ang concept ani niya when creating your flowchart, pare-pareha ra pod sa katong gibuhat nato sa Word. Okay? Select the shape, drag it into the workspace, okay? Then edit it. Okay? So kamo na yung bahala magbutang dire unsay ibutang ninyo nga label inside. Okay, ang process, ang input, okay? Or let's say for example baron ang decision nga buhaton. Okay? That's it. Okay? So question so far about some diagram tools, again, so easy. How about sa pseudocode? For the pseudocode, you can use any text editing tool. Okay? Pinaka-simple nga text editing tool gamiton ninyo Notepad o kana. Okay? You won't be needing any mga proprietary software like PowerPoint, Word, okay? Notepad ra jud, which is again free. Okay? So, maara na siya guys. I think that will wrap up our discussion for flowcharting and pseudocode. Now, what was the third again? Okay, the third type of implementing your algorithm. So, natay pseudocode, natay flowchart, ug unsay ikatulo.
Program.
Okay, creating the program. Okay. So we will now start learning how to program. Okay, with a very specific language in mind, ang C nga programming language. Okay? So before we go into coding in C, okay, let us first get to know a little bit about the C language. Okay? So ana man jud na no, before nimo ilailahon, okay, before nimo gamiton si C language, ato asa siyang ilailahon unsay background niya. Okay, and how it came into being. Okay, so a bit of history about C programming language. Okay, so what is C, by the way? So as stated there, C is one of those gitawag nato nga high level language. Okay, a language which is closer to human language. So makita nato before sa evolution, we all started with machine code, then symbolic language or the so-called assembly code, then we move into the high level language. Okay, so as stated here, C is considered as a high level language because it allows the programmer to concentrate on the problem at hand and not worry about the machine, okay, that the program will be using. Okay, so that is one advantage of using high level language. You don't need to know how the machine works, unlike the machine code or the assembly language. You can just focus on what needs to be done. Okay, so be it you using a cell phone or a desktop or a laptop, okay, or even on your Android phone, okay ra jud na siya. Okay, wa ra jud problema. So we can use C to create system application, okay, that can directly interact with the hardware devices such as drivers and kernels. Okay, so if you try to look at your other applications there, you can see nga na yung mga drivers which has an extension of .dll. Okay, so most of those are created using C, C++ nga language. Okay, so C is considered as the base for other programming language. That is why it is known as the mother language. Okay, and this is also the reason why we choose C as our language of choice for this subject. Okay, because we could make use of Java, we can use C sharp, okay, we can use Python, okay, we can even use JavaScript, okay, para web browser na lang ato ang kailangan. Okay, but again, since C is the mother of all language, learning C would essentially mean that there will be a very uh, easy learning curve for you to learn other language once you learn C. Okay? So, mo na siya guys. We will start with C. Okay? So, a bit of history about C. Kinsa may gahimo aning C. So, again, C was developed between 1969 to 1973. Okay? Along with Unix at AT&T Bell Labs USA. Okay? And we all attribute it to the efforts of Dennis Ritchie and Brian Kernighan. Okay? So I think murag nakadungog naman siguro mo aning Dennis Ritchie, no? Okay? Wala mo kadungog. Wa jud uya ni niya oy. Okay? So the developer of C language niya wala jud. May pa si Bill Gates, okay? Ilado pa. Okay, si Dennis Ritchie in town, wala kaayo masikat. Okay? So anyway, depende ra man gud na sa tao no kung asa sila mas nalingaw. Okay? Mas nalingaw man sila sa gipanghimo ni Bill Gates. Okay? So again, with the efforts of Dennis Ritchie, okay, in creating this C language, okay, essentially the C language was used to create system programs. Okay, so just like operating systems, utility programs, and even other compilers. Okay, so C evolves from this language called BCPL. Okay? So, mo na gitawag og C. May gali wala nay D no. Okay? But we know nga naa nay C sharp or naapoy C++, which is basically an upgrade to the C programming language. Okay? So, mo na sila mga tawhan na guys kung maka-develop mo time machine, mo na inyong pangitaon. Okay? Hopefully para pasalamatan og dili i-assassinate. Okay? Because C is very useful jud. Okay? So especially when you will go learn embedded systems. Okay? Kanang magamit na niya tag Arduino, we'll be using C. Okay? Though there are a lot of language that we can use, okay? C is very powerful man god. Okay? So again, with C language, you really don't need to go deeper into the hardware implementation, just like assembly. Okay, you can focus on what needs to be done. Okay, so again, here is the taxonomy of our C programming language. Okay, so as what we can see there, okay, gikan sa kanang algol nga programming language, okay, we were then able to branch out into three different programming language. Okay? So naadira na introduce si BCPL, okay? Si Algol and si Pascal, okay? So I think some of this programming language dili kayo ilado. Let's say for example si Algol, okay? So I think wala jud ko kaagian niya when I was still studying. But si Pascal nakatry mi ani before when I was in high school. Okay? So kani si C, I've only learned about C when I was already in college. Okay? I think some of you here high school pa lang, okay, nakaton na og ang uban sa to C sharp ug ang Java no. Okay? So which is a language nga medyo much easier as compared to C. Okay? So, mo ni ang ilang evolution guys, gikan sa Algol. Okay, nahimong BCPL, Algol 68, then Pascal. Okay? So, from BCPL, evolved B, the traditional C, and the so-called ANSI slash ISOC. Okay? So, ANSI, kay nga naman, okay, na-standardize naman diri ang C. Unlike atong traditional C before, which is a bit more of like proprietary siya. So daghan silag mga libraries which is again some are not found on other C variant. So mo na they standardize C. Okay? Para common sa tanan. Okay? So we can see here the timeline of how those programming languages evolved. Okay? So from Algol, BCPL, okay? Then it becomes B, then comes C nga language, okay, which was started by Dennis Ritchie. Then by 1978, gitabangan nila og improve ni Kernighan. And then by 1989, okay, niagi na siya og ANSI committee. Okay? So ready for the in standardization. Okay? So muna si ISO, International Organization, Standardization Organization. Okay? And then by 1999, okay, it was then upgraded to a version of C99. Then by 2011, na ay nigawas na po nga laing standard for C which is C11. Okay? So if you look and research about programming language, even programming languages like C Sharp and Java keeps on evolving. Okay? So makabantay mo laing version. Okay? So si .NET for instance where C Sharp is supporting naabot na tag 5. Okay? Kung anhi ka sa Java, naabot na ang iyahang JDK to version 18. Okay? So of course, nganong sige man nag-usab. Okay? It's because every now and then, okay, these software engineers keep on thinking ways to improve the language. Okay? And probably C is the most stable one. Okay? Nganong matawag na tong stable? Because flat na ihang curve. Wala na kaayo'y masyadong development because it has already reached its maximum potential. Okay? However, with other programming language, it still keeps on evolving. Mo nang usahay kapoy kay magkat-on nila kay kung unsay nakat-onan ni Moron next year naa na say maad. Okay? So mo na siya whereas kani kung unsa to'y nakatunan sa inyong mga ginikanan before while they are studying programming, in a way maura gyapon nay magamit ninyo karon. Okay? So not much of a change. But again, the basics are still the same with other programming language. Okay? So naalay mga features that makes programming more easier. Kay naay mga ipang-add na features. Okay? So kana, would it hurt for you not to learn those new stuff? Not really. Okay? If you know the basics, bisag unsa pa na ang problema, masulbad ra jud na ninyo. Though it would really help if you know these additional features. Kay this could actually also help simplify the implementation. The usual implementation, which is usually let's say 10 lines of codes to write, may be implemented in a single code na lang with these new features nga inyong makatunan. Okay? Kaning mga library nga ato ang gitawag. Okay? So that's it. History of C programming language. Okay, now let's look at what C language really looks like. Okay, so in a C language, okay, it is basically consisting of the following parts. Kaning gitawag nato nga preprocessor commands, the functions, variables, statements, and expression, and comments. Okay, so those are the parts that you will seemingly see in a simple C programming language. Okay, so here is your very first C programming language. Okay, so on top we have the preprocessor. Okay, here is the so-called implementation of a function kanang int main. Okay, here is another use of a function printf, which allows you to print on the monitor. Okay, so here are another statement, okay, that you will be learning when programming in C. Okay, so ang return is actually a so-called keyword, a reserved word that is being utilized by the language, and you cannot use that for any other purpose. Okay, so nalang jud na siya definite nga gamit para asa na siya. Okay, so would you like to try this out? Okay, and what do we use? Okay, to run this program. Okay, have you already downloaded katong Dev C++ by Embarcadero, guys?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Na-download na, sir.
sige. So let's try
Wala
this.
pa ako kasi.
Wala pa, patay.
Ngay, kanang bago pa na palitan sir. Oh,
Ay,
laptop.
sana all. Okay. Ah, so for those nga wala pa ka-install o kaning gitawag nato nga Dev C++ by Embarcadero, okay? You can try to visit this site, guys. onlinejdb.com. Okay? So this is an online classroom or an online compiler, a platform where you can create code in C Sharp. Okay? So there's actually a lot of supported programming language here. Okay, so even Java, Python, PHP, C Sharp, you can even do HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. Okay, so daghan kay siya og supported. Okay, so for us, we'll just use kanilang si C. Okay, so how do we run the code? So again, just simply click on run. Okay, so your output will be displayed here. Okay, so kaning hello world, this is the thing that you want to display on your screen. Okay, and this is the output of this program. Okay, so let's say for instance in dev C++, how do we create the program in dev C++? So again, it is as simple as creating a new source file, or you can just say new document. Okay, so by default it is entitled untitled. Okay, so we just type in our code. Again, this is the preprocessor part. Okay, this is the function main, okay, which is considered as the entry point of our application. So when you say entry point, when you run your application, mauna unang pangitaon, si int main. Okay? So everything starts here. Okay? Kang int main. So, of course, what do we do to run this? As you can see, medyo disabled ang atoang tools dire. We cannot use them. So we need to save this first. Okay? So we'll just save it in our folder. Make sure guys, you save it in .c format. Okay? So by default, that is .cpp. You change it to .c. Okay? So let's just name it as sample. Uy. Sample. Okay? So there it is. Okay? So anhita sa execute. Okay? We can now click on compile and run. So actually, as if you've remembered our previous discussion, okay, the flow of how you run your program starts during compilation. Okay? So when you compile your program, unsa ganito i-generate niya guys ng output? Okay? So when you compile, it generates that obj file, okay, object file, and links it with your library to create this so-called executable file. Okay? So after creating that executable file, then you can run. Okay? So i-run mo, mauni mo gawas sa imong application. Okay? So naa siya'y hello world nga mo gawas, which is basically kani, the one that you want to print. Okay? So let's say, let's add more words. Okay? So if you want to add more words, again, just use printf again. Okay? Hello world. Let's say, I am me. Okay? So running this program, okay, di na lang nako tagsa-tagsaon, I'll just click compile and run. Okay? So this is what will be displayed. Okay? So what have we noticed so far? Okay? Nisumpay si I am me, wala sa ubos gibutang. Okay? So nganong wala man sa ubos gibutang, nga sa print dire naka-inline naman ni sila. So that is because guys, when you print the hello world first, okay? Let's run this first. Okay? By default, your cursor will be placed here. So when you issue that command again, nga I am me, okay, it will just continue, okay, on the next line of code. Okay, now if you want nga kaning I am me is to be placed below sa hello world, okay, kinsa to yung nakaagi diri Java og C#, what do we add?
New line sir.
New line. And what is the character for new line?
Backslash niya and
Backslash niya n. Okay? So, this is our so-called escape sequence, okay, for creating new line. Okay? So, slash n. So, when you run this application again, okay, so I can just simply make use of F11 para di ko magsigig click sa mouse. Okay? There you go. Okay. So with slash n, essentially, before printing I am me, it will create a new line. So it is like equivalent to the enter key nga imuhang gi-press on your keyboard. Okay? So that is how slash n works. Okay? So, okay, what's with all the fuss? Okay? Unsa man ning int main, unsa man ang return 0. Okay? What is it used for? Okay? And unsa man ang si include stdio. Okay? So if we try to dissect the code, kanang si sharp include stdio, as what I said earlier, it is the preprocessor directive that allows you to make use of the library stdio.h. Okay? Unsa man ang naa ni stdio.h? stdio.h contains kaning gitawag nato nga functions, okay, which are created by the programmers for you to use. Okay, so one example of kaning gitawag nato nga function nga gihimo sa mga programmer para magamit ninyo is kaning si printf, okay, which allows you to display the word hello world in the monitor. Okay? So you don't need to create this from scratch kay nganuman labad kay na sa ulo. Okay? Ang implementation sa printf. So they have simplified the printing of the characters or the word hello world for you by implementing this function. And for you to access that function, you need to add stdio.h. Okay? So most of our basic functions are actually already included under sa stdio.h. Okay? So stdio, nganong stdio man, na siya std. Okay? Unsa man ning std? std there stands for standard. Okay? So standard IO. Unsa man ang IO? Input, output. Okay? So printf, okay guys, is an example of how we can generate an output. Okay? Now, if you remembered in the flowchart, di ba? Unsay gigamit nato to generate the output? The parallelogram. And how do we indicate in the parallelogram if it is an input or output? We use the keyword print. Okay? So, looks familiar? Printf. Okay. So, kung magamit tag printf, that is how we generate our output. Okay? So, mo na gamit ni include stdio. Okay? So, it allows us o mao na siya kung kitang sulti. But anyway, mas maayo rag ako ng istorya kamo nalay basa ni later kung makalimot mo. Okay? Again, the preprocessor allows you to add libraries, okay, to your program. Libraries which may contain function to help make your coding easier. Kay naa na gipang implement nga functions dito ready for you to use. Okay? So take note lang. Sharp include. Okay? And then this is the library. Okay? So kani may mag-usab-usab. Okay? Every time mag-add kag library, kani may gamito nimo. Okay? So you add the library inside the less than greater than symbol. Okay? And then next we have the int main. Okay? Unsa man ning int main? Int main will contain the code that will be run by the system. Okay? Anything inside the so-called open close curly brackets are what we call as the statement block. Okay? So that block of code that will be executed when you compile and run your application. So tanang instructions nga gihatag nimo sa computer to do will be located in that so-called statement block. Okay, so again, take note. Statement block is identified by the so-called open close curly brace. Okay, so paris jud na siya guys. If there's that opening, make sure na adyod na siya closing nga curly brace. magpartner jud na siya. If you tend to remove one, okay, opening right na, you will not be able to make your program run. So let's say if we try to remove this one, okay? So, okay. So if we run my application, as you can see, oh, it highlights this part of your code, return 0. Kaya nga naman, if you go down below, okay, and read the error code, you will see that there is an error, okay, on that part of the statement. Okay, so ang nakanindot anyo, it is easy for you to trace where the error is. The compiler will actually guide you asa possibly located ang error. Okay, so as stated here, what is the error? Expected declaration or statement at the end of the input. Okay, so unsa man nga declaration iyang gipasabot. So what was that I erase? Okay, I erase the closing curly brace. Okay, so as you can see guys, I have placed the curly brace right after the keyword return, which is ganina naman sa ubos, di ba? But if I again run this statement, okay, it will still compile successfully. So as you can see, there's no errors, no warnings. So that means my application compiled correctly. Okay, so mao na siya. So in CDI, kaning gitawag nato nga white space, like magbutang kag more enter, really won't matter. So if you see, I have added here another line. What would my output be? Would it add more lines? No, it will not add more lines. Kaya nga naman, when you write the code here, it's like you are not really telling the computer to add more line. If you want to add more line between hello world and I am me, you simply add /n again to create new line. In C, guys, take note, kaning gitawag nato nga white space really doesn't affect your program. Because for all I know, okay, you could actually create your code in a single line like this. Okay? Pwede rin ana. Okay? You could actually still run the code without any problem. Okay? And the output still is the same. Okay? So, muna gitawag nato nga in C, white spaces really doesn't matter. Pero of course, why do we arrange it in this manner? Okay? So it is for readability purposes. Okay? Para makita nimo one instruction at a time. Okay? So again, you can create it in a single line, but again, it will make your code unreadable. Okay? So mura siya halo-halo tanawon. Okay? So at least ingani structured ang imong program. Makita nimo what is being done first, then what is next. Okay? So, though as what we can see, it is not mandatory for you, okay, to create a tab or a space between codes because white space man di ay doesn't affect your program. But of course, as a habit, okay, as what other programmers practice, it would be better if you add tabs. Okay? Para it will be easier for you later to distinguish what is included in this so-called statement block. Okay? So later in our program, you will be encountering that inside the so-called statement block, it is possible for you to create another statement block. Okay? So para maklaro jud nimo asa masud ang kaning nga procedure, like for instance when you were creating your pseudocode, if you've remembered, di ba, when you use the selection statements or the iteration or repetition statements, di ba, we always put an additional tab para mahibaw-an nato what is needed to be done on those selection statement or repetition statements or the so-called loops. Okay, so same ra pod diri in C. Okay, so it really won't matter for the compiler because di man na niya basahon, but for the programmer it could make it less hurting in the eyes. Okay, kay sakit kay na magsubay og program nga igtan-aw nimo sa program one line of code. Now imagine ang code ninyo could actually reach up to 1,000 lines. And imagine if that code is written in a single line. Makapanguros ka og basa sa code ana guys. Lisod kay subayon. Okay? So mo na siya as a practice, okay? Let's make it a habit, one instruction at a time. Just like when you create your pseudocode, 'di ba? When you create your pseudocode, 'di ba? Ato amo na siyang isuwat in a way that we will be creating one instruction per line. Okay? So mausad na tong i-implement ani dire. Okay? So asa naman to? So that guys is our first implementation of the program. So unsa pa may murag kahibugnan ani nga part. How about kani? What does it mean? Okay? Every time makakita mo og naay open close parenthesis after a certain label, okay? This is what we call as label or what we call as identifier, okay? It would mean that it is an implementation of a function. Okay? So when you create a C program, if you want to run your program, you really need to have this function. Okay? Now, probably in some books, you would be seeing in ani guys. Instead of int main, you will be seeing void. And you won't be seeing kaning gitawag nato nga return. Okay? In some books, you might be seeing this example. Nganong sa example ni Sir, lahi lagi, nganong mo gamit siya int main, pero sa ubang books nga nabasa nako, void main lagi, unsay pasabot-an ng int o unsay pasabot-an ng void. Okay? So, let's look at the difference when you run the application. Okay? What have you noticed? Sa before o sa after. Oops, nyara. So, this is the before and this is the after. So, let's put it side by side. Okay? So, for you to see, what is the difference? Kaluoy.
Seconds, sir.
Ang seconds. Okay? So, unsa maning seconds?
Mas faster ang void.
Number to pag ang return value.
Return value, sir.
Ang return value. Okay? So, kani, katong napatay int main, return 0. Kani, void lang siya. Walay return value. Okay? And it gave you 9. Okay? So, if you try that on other compilers, okay, like for example, let's try that online JDB. Okay, and again, we remove the return and we just simply put there void main, okay? Unsay i-return niya nga value. Okay? So, wala siya return value but it's simply right there an exit code of 0 meaning walay problem. Okay? So, when we compare it here kang Embarcadero, okay? That so-called return value guys is actually very useful na siya. Okay? Nganong useful man na siya, sir? That return value will serve as your identifier if your program has run correctly or not. Okay? Nganong makaingon mang kang nay problema ang program. Okay? Kay diri man good, okay, if you try to run this program kaning void main nya walay return value, ang return value makuha nimo diri is random. Okay? So that means the return value of 9 that is shown on my computer might be different on your computer. It will just give you a random value. Pero if you make use of kaning gitawag nga int main nya return 0, okay? And take note, every time that you add a kaning gitawag nato nga statement, okay, you always end it with a semicolon. Okay? So in C, take note, each statement or each instruction is always terminated by a semicolon. And that is how your C language is able to identify, okay, if this is the first, if this is the second, or if this is the third statement or instruction nga imuhang gibuhat. Okay? So, for those who have made use of C Sharp and Java, same ra na siya og concept. Okay? We use the semicolon to terminate the instruction. Using this, okay, format when creating your code would ensure nga if there is no problem with the code running, it will always read a value of 0 under sa return value. Okay? Unsam din ang 0? 0 is actually kani mismo. As the statement implies, it returns to the user a value of 0. Okay? Now, ganina, we use void. Okay? Unsa man din ang void? Okay? In layman's term, unsay nasabtan ninyo sa void nga word?
Empty space, sir.
Empty. Okay? So, mingon kag void. Okay? Meaning, di ba? Wala. Okay? Naa kay girlfriend? Void, sir. Okay? So, ingan na to ang isulti, no? Kung wala manggani. Okay? Whereas, when you say int, unsa man ang int? Int there is actually short for integer. Okay? So, when you say integer, that means any whole number. So, an example there is 0. 0 is a whole number. Okay? So 0 ang value nga iyahang i-return. Actually, you can put there any number, guys. Okay? Not just 0. Okay? Let's say mubutang kag 143. Okay? If you run this again, okay? You will be receiving 143 as the return value of this function. Okay? So mo na pasabot anang int dira, guys. Okay? It will return to you a whole number. Okay? So when you run your program, kabaw ka na the computer was able to successfully run all the instructions nga imuhang gibuhat because it has reached this last part of your instruction. And you were able to receive the value 143. Okay? So mo na gamit when you say int return then any value. In this case, we'll just keep it 0. Okay? Because sometimes when you see a number there, okay, sa imuhang output, it would mean nga naay problem sa imuhang gibuhat. Okay? Let me just show you an example. Let's say int x is equal to 5 divided by 0. Okay? So even calculators, di ba? Crash when you do division by 0. Okay? So as you can see here, kabantay mo, after sa hello world nga to ang gi-implement, I have created a variable which will generate an integer. Okay? And what is this variable containing? a value of 5 divided by 0. Kung tanaw ninyo, ni-proceed ba siya sa next line after performing the division? Wala. The program actually crash. Okay? How will we know nga normal ra na siya or abnormal na siya nga output? It is because, as you can see on the return value here, guys, expected unta nimo is it will have a value of 0, meaning it has reached this part of the code. But as what we can see, since ni-crash naman imong program diri at this part of the code, wala siya mo sunod or wala siya mo proceed with printing I am me, you can see that when your program stops, the return value nga makita nimo diri is not 0 as expected. Okay? So when you experience that in your program, that means somewhere along the line, okay, a problem has occurred. Okay? And that is, okay, one of the things that you need to learn when making your programs. How to identify if there are problems in your code. Okay? So, since naghisgot naman taog problems, okay, if you try to review the previous notes that we have, okay, here are the usual programming errors that you will be encountering, okay, when creating your program. Okay, number 1, syntax error. Okay, unsa maning syntax error? As stated, this will occur when your code violates one or more grammar rules of programming language and is detected by the compiler is as it attempts to translate your program into machine language. Okay? So one example of mistakes would include misspelled words, missing punctuation character, incorrect use of operator. Okay? So that could generate a syntax error. So let me demonstrate, okay, that syntax error. So I told you earlier that every instruction that you write here must end with a semicolon, right? Okay. So if I remove that semicolon, okay, and compile the program again, as you can see, it generates an error. Gi-underline na niya ang kaninga line to where the error could be located. Okay? So as you can see, unsay error? Expected semicolon before int. Asa man si int, dara. So before int, pwede ko kabutag semicolon dira. Pwede no? Kay mo may gingon niya. Expected semicolon before int. And asa man si int, dara si int. Okay? Kay when I selected this, naman dire ang error. So ang pangitaon nimo nga error would be somewhere along here. So if you put the semicolon on this part and you run the program, boom, the problem is gone. We were able to compile. But of course, again, because of this so-called division of zero, ni-crash gihapon na to ang program. Okay? So, again, as what I told you, kanang semicolon, guys, nga gibutang nato sa ubos, dili siya tupad diri sa closing parenthesis. It's okay in C because C really won't mind about those extra spaces that were added here. Okay? Those are not read by C. Okay? So, mao na siya, guys, syntax error. So again, kana missing punctuation character. Now, how about misspelled word? Okay? So let's say print if nasayop kag spelling nahimo nimong uh, unsa may noticeable difference. Let's say kanina lang. Okay? Nahimo nimong capital. Okay? So when you run your application, boom, it generates this error again. Okay? So asa man ng error? So undefined reference to print if. So wala siya kaila ni print if wherein nagamit kag capital P. Okay? para niya wrong spelling na. Okay? So in short, when you talk about C programming language, it is case sensitive. Ang small p o capital P are treated differently. Okay? Now, samot na kung marong spelling no. Print F. Okay, kana klaro kay wrong spelling. So bright kay ang compiler, guys. Ma-detect jud na niya. Wa siya kay lag print F. Okay? So you need to be very specific about your spelling pod. Okay? Ma-practice jud yung spelling ninyo diri syaro masayop mo ng print if. Okay? So, mo na siya, guys. Example sa kanang gitawag nato nga syntax error. So, when there is a syntax error, your compiler will not be able to translate your program into machine code and therefore your program will not run. Okay? So, mo na siya sa syntax error. Runtime error. Okay? Unsa man sa ning runtime error? Runtime error are detected errors and displayed by the compiler during the execution of the program. Okay? So this occurs when the program directs the computer to perform illegal operations such as dividing a number by zero. So we have encountered it earlier that when you do the division by zero, oh no, kadyat lang guys, wait sa. Ah, yeah. Down ang Facebook ron. Wait sa guys ha, kay na ay gisend nga meeting link. Di ma-open.
Maka-open naman sa Facebook, sir.
Sa PC.
Oh, PC ni Rana ko, sir. Ambot lang.
Sa
Padayon
mob,
ba?
murag sa mobile, di man ma-open ang messenger. Bakit?
Naunsa din yung kuhan, sir. Social media.
Ah, tungod siguro na atong sa Squid Game gi-appeal man ng Facebook nga icon o Instagram o Twitter. Wa siguro masulbad. Mo na gipatay. Okay. So karon pa in town ko naka realize aning si Julie's Bake Shop nga nung na-appeal ni siya. Kadyot lang guys, wait. Let me
Take your time, sir.
ako alang ning i-on daan kay sa una lang wa jud siya di jud mo respond ay my goodness. Ah, wait sa guys, kadyot lang ha. Okay, so let's take a break lang sa 15 minutes break lang. Wait sa. Okay, I will just set this up. Okay, so break sa ta 15 minutes before we proceed.
Okay, sir.
Thank you, sir.
ここは鬼納めだ。
still compile, pero in the middle of the operation while your computer is running, this error occurs. Okay, and when this error occurs, again, uh, it's either mo crash ang imong application and stop in the middle, okay? Especially when you are only running the executable code, but if you're using kaning debugger, okay, you will be able to trace kung asa dapit ang program because you will be seeing it somewhere here, okay? Ang possible source of error. Just like again, when we tried to run this problem, okay? So makita na to nga naay division by zero nga nahitabo, okay? And your program crashed, okay? So here is a simple debug that you can do, guys, okay? Para ma-identify ninyo asa posible na hitabo ang kaning mga runtime error. And that is, let us control, okay, how your code runs line by line or instruction by instruction, okay? And this is the reason why I ask you nga, when you make your program, as much as possible, you do it one instruction at a time. O may pa si Mr. Umandak, busog na.
Busugan TV.
Lagi, busog naman kay nguy. Burp naman. Kamintaw, no pay pamahaw. Pamaluto. Okay? So, kaniya nga to ang buhaton, okay, to prepare your IDE for debugging, okay? So, you simply go to tools, okay? Compiler options, and then agto sa settings. Okay? So, under sa settings, you go into the linker. Okay? And make sure kaning generate debugging information minus G3 naka-yes na siya. Okay? So, mao na siya ato ang needed. Okay? Nga ato ang i-set up daan before we do kaning gitawag nato nga debugging. Okay? So, after that, okay, what do we need to do next? I will add a breakpoint. Okay? Unsa man ang breakpoint? Okay? So, a breakpoint is like an identifier for your debugger to stop, okay, when that line is encountered. Okay? So akong ibutang diri kanang iksud pa lang sa main, akong ibutang dira ako ang breakpoint para igpadagan ako sa program at this point mo stop siya. So I can control the execution of the instruction line by line. Okay? So again, when you do the debugging, what you do first, especially when you have updated your code, always compile first. Okay? So morning naa ni siyang option na separate ang compile, separate ang run. This is for debugging purposes. Okay? So after compiling, okay, iyahan nang tawagan ay gi-generate ang imuhang machine code. Okay? You then go to debug. Okay? So under sa debug, okay, igpa-run sa application, have you noticed the icon nga ni change? Okay? So gikan katong sa red nga circle nga naay check mark, it is now looking like that of an arrow. Okay? Unfortunately, when you do the tawagan when you do the pag zoom in ug zoom out, ang arrow still maintains its size. Okay? So dili siya mo dako ang arrow, but that actually there, okay, is an arrow as you can see, oh. Pero gamay lang jud kayo siya. Okay? So nana siya arrow, blue ang size, blue ang color day. Okay? So you'll also encounter that on your output, okay, butang na nato side by side para makita nato line by line. Okay? And this is your code. Okay? O asa naman to si Embarcadero. Okay? So you'll see it here, guys. Okay? that wala pag i-print ang hello world nga line. Okay, and my arrow is here. So what I'll do is I'll simply go to the next line. Okay, press this. Okay, or I could just say, okay, click on F7. Okay, so I'll just press this one, next line, or press F7. Okay, so next line na ko, boom. It executes that instruction sa ibabaw, makita ninyo nga ni-print ng hello world. So now I am pointing on the next instruction to execute. If I execute that by saying next line, boom. Okay, there's your error. Okay, so your error occurred on this line. And what is that error? It receives a signal seg FPE arithmetic expression, and that is caused by that so-called division of 0. Okay? So kung imuha pa ng ipadayon, wa na. Ni-crash na jud ang imong program. Okay? So mo to, ni-close na siya. So out of the blue, the program crash, it automatically closes. Okay? So very rampant na siya nga problem sa una with other application, di ba no? And usually in Windows, okay, that kind of problem kanang gitawag nato nga runtime error is what we considered also as the blue screen of death. Okay, I do believe sa una sa Windows, you have encountered that one, di ba? Si blue screen of death, wherein the operating system itself crashed. Okay, in the middle of something. Okay, so that is an example of what we call as a runtime error. Okay, so mo ni kuyaw guys, kay nga naman, makompile man nimo ang program and you might be expecting na everything will run correctly. And when you are there presenting your output, in the middle mo kalitlag crash, boom, di ba? Wow kaayo. Okay? So, oftentimes we see that in mga big launches, di ba? Sa Microsoft sa una nga, nag-demo sa operating system and boom, nag-blue screen of death. Okay? Wow kaayo. Okay? So, even si Elon Musk, di ba, didn't escape that. Okay? Labi na kato ilahang demo nila sa ilahang Cybertruck. Di ko no mabuak ang bildo. Pero paglabay sa metal ball, uy, someone's gonna get axe. Okay? So anyway, another type of error, okay, which is probably the most difficult one to detect is the logic error. Okay? Unsa maning logic error. Okay? This will occur when a program follows a faulty algorithm. Okay? It does not cause a runtime error, nor does it cause a syntax error. Okay? So, that is very difficult to detect. Unsa may example aning gitawag nga logic error. Okay? So, one example of a logic error, guys, is for example, if you are asked to get the sum of two numbers. Nya, pagkuha ni mong sum of two numbers, you do this. Okay? Nakita ninyo ang logic error? If I run my application, compile. It compiles successfully. If I run it, it runs perfectly. Di ba? Walay error. Okay? Pero sayop siya. Nganong sayop man? Ang instruction was to get the sum of two numbers. And what you did here is you solved for the difference. Okay? Maunay pinakalisod sulbon. Kay you might be thinking nga okay, ni-compile na ang program. Ni-run na siya. Nag-return value 0 na ko. That means nahuman ako ang program. Okay na ni. But when you check your code or your final output, it didn't perform addition. Sayop ang logic. Okay? So, mo na usa sa mga pinakalisod sulbon jud. Okay, ang algorithm. Okay? So, those are the three common programming errors that you will be encountering niya. Okay? Syntax error, may pinakadali kay compile pa lang daan mo, generate na mag-error. You cannot proceed with your program until this is done. Ang next nga sayon nga error is ang runtime error. So again, I have demonstrated to you kanina how to look for that runtime error. What you can do is you can run your program one instruction at a time. So you will be able to detect where the runtime error occurs. Okay? And ang pinakalisod, the logic error. Okay? Kay nga naman, it all has something to do with the faulty algorithm or giunsa nimo pagsabot ang problem. Okay? So mo na ang pinakalisod. Okay? So now that we have learned about the common problems that you might encounter in implementing a C program, okay, let's now proceed more on C programming. Okay? So, familiar na ta why we are using int main instead of void main? Okay, so again, the reason for this is for us to identify if the program really did reach the last part of our instruction, which is to return a value of 0. If you run your program and you didn't get 0 as a return value, that means your program may have crashed somewhere in between. Okay, so it might have encountered a so-called runtime error. Okay, how about ang logic error, sir? Posible ba ma-detect? Dili. Okay, dili. Okay, mo nang gingon natong lisod jud takpo na si logic error. Okay? So, let's try to solve that problem with syntax error. Okay? So for us to know how to program correctly, we must learn about some basic syntax in C programming. Okay? So familiar na ta sa structure, kailangan nato una og preprocessor, then sunod kailangan nato na ay int main function. Okay? And the rest is makatunan na ninyo later. Okay? So when you do your program, guys, automatic dayon. Okay? You create this. Okay? When starting a C program, automatic dayon. Preprocessor, the int main function, and you have one statement there nga i-add inside the statement block. Okay? This will serve as your starting template when doing your C code. And the rest of the implementation for your algorithm or flowchart will be placed here. Okay? So you place your code there. Okay? Now, as you can see, uy, lahi lagi ang color ana niya. Nganong green? Okay? Why not na pareha ani niya? Okay? Kabantay mo guys, night color coding. This is green. Kaning's return is blue. When I use print, okay? Lahi po siya color. Diba? Asa na siya? Cyan. Kani may pagka light green. Okay? Hindi maklaro ang light green o ang pagka-cyan nga color, light cyan. Okay? So sagdi lang, when you try to open your compiler, makita ninyo lain-lain din na siya color actually. Okay? So it has something to do with the syntax. So the IDE there, guys, will actually help you identify some of the most common syntax. Okay? Unlike if you use your so-called notepad. Okay? You can actually make a program in notepad pero hassle na kayo when you do the compilation kay ikaw pa'y mo type sa command line. Nya ikaw pa'y magpangita asa man tong file na butang. So if ang file mo na butang in a directory nga lawom na kaayo, kapoy kay type sa path, di ba? Okay? So that's why we use this so-called IDEs. Okay? So even online compilers provides color coding, okay, for you to identify those basic syntax. Okay, so let's try to learn about the basic syntax. Okay, so a C program consists of various tokens, and the token is either a keyword, an identifier, a constant, a string literal, or a symbol. Okay, so let us look at this example. Okay, so it is indicated here that there are different tokens in this one statement. Okay, so the first token that we have, okay, so as you can see, token can either be a keyword, an identifier, a constant, a string literal, or a symbol. Okay, so kanira day nga statement, daghan na kay na siyang gitawag nato nga tokens. Okay, so when you say tokens, guys, it's just like every part of your expression. Okay, just like when you say x is equal to a plus b. Okay, unsa may mga tokens involved ana niya. So we have the addend, the augen, and the sum, and of course the assignment operator na padyug kay arithmetic operator, di ba? So those are what we call as the tokens. Okay, and basically that is how the computer, okay, manipulates your data by breaking down your statement into tokens. Okay, so it could better understand how to perform the expression that you have given it, okay, or the instruction that you have given it. Okay, so looking for this, natay printf, napatay open parenthesis, then naatay, this is what you call, guys, as the string literal. Okay, how will you know if it is a string literal? If it is enclosed in double quotes. Okay, so anything that is enclosed in double quotes, we consider them as your string literal. Okay, unya, another token is your closing parenthesis. Okay, so kung naa kay mga opening, expected na adjud na closing, just like your curly braces. Okay, and of course the last token that we have here is the semicolon. Okay, so the semicolon again is used to terminate the instruction. The printf, unsa maning printf? Printf is a keyword. Okay, nganong keyword man si printf? Another term for keywords, guys, is reserve word. Okay, this word is being reserved by the compiler for the purpose of utilizing the word as a command to perform printing of this string. Okay, kani gitawag nato nga string literal. Okay? So imagine no, usa ra ka expression, daghan na diyan niyag token, daghan kaayo gisabot si compiler, daghan kay siya sub operations gi-perform. Okay? And this is just one of the basics nga to ang makatunan. Okay? This so-called function nga printf. Okay? So we already are familiar with what semicolons are. Okay, so semicolons, we use them as your statement terminator. Okay, so it is used to indicate the end of one logical entity, or kanang gitawag nato nga usa ka instruction. Okay, comments, unsa man sa ding comments? Okay, comments are like helping text in your C program, and they are ignored by the compiler. So that means when you add comments, dili ni siya i-appeal og basa sa compiler. Okay? So why do we need to add comments to our program kung di na basahon sa compiler? Ang comments are for the programmer, for the users to read. Okay? So just like as what I have shown here, this is an example of a comment. Okay? This is not read by the compiler, but it helps guides the programmer on what to do and what is the thing that we need to do. This is where you put your code. Okay? Now, lagi ni iyang comment diri sir, slash asterisk. Okay? This comment is for single line comment. Whereas, kaning moingon ka slash asterisk, okay, makabantay mo guys sa slash asterisk, the moment I put the slash asterisk, everything below turns green. And just like this one, if it's green, it is considered as a comment. Okay? So this is so-called the multi-line comment. Okay? Ang multi-line comment allows you to create comments that span through multiple lines. Kay kapoy man kayo, let's say naa kay murag one paragraph nga comment dira, nya butangan nimo og double slash tanan. Line by line butangan nimo. Whereas with multi-line comment, you just define asa ang first point sa comment ug ang last line sa imong comment. And everything in between is considered as a comment. Okay? So again, makita nato dire two ways of adding comments. Okay? Using multi-line and using single line comments. Okay? So again, comments are not part of the instruction. They will not be read by the compiler. Okay? So they are ignored by the compiler. Okay? So here is an example guys showing multi-line comment. Okay? So kanira importante slash asterisk ug asterisk slash. So you can even compose your song there. Okay? Patas-anay sa code pero song ra day puros comment. Kay kung mag-compose kag song dira, i-apil mo compile, mag-syntax error man ka. Okay? So you just simply put a comment para dili i-apil sa compiler imong gi-compose nga kanta. Okay? So very important ang comments guys sa programming kay ngano man. You start your program today. Okay? Nya wa sa nimo tiwasa kay nakay gibuhat. Imong tiwason siya a week later. Iglingkod nimo balik si mong siya atubang si imong code. Would you even remember what you were doing last week? Dili na, 'di ba? So you add comments, okay? To remind you nga oy anhin ako dapita og naglisod kog sulbad aning dapita or this is the algorithm that I use to solve this problem. Okay? Or this is the list of people whom I can call to help me with this problem. Okay? So mo na gamit sa tuang comments. Okay? So things that you shouldn't do with comments is that inner comment is not allowed. Okay? So if you put a comment within another multi-line comment, okay, that would generate an error. Okay? Kay nganuman, as you created a comment, paris manggihapon na siya guys. Okay? Kung mauni ang pang-open, pangitaon jud na ni ang pares which is ang pang-closing. So kung na kay closing, unsa man nga line, di na siya mabasa as a comment. Kay wala man kay opening. So this becomes a syntax error. Okay? So mo nang dili pwede ang inner comments. Okay? Kay again, paris-paris man na siya. Okay? Now, let's look onto this another token nga to ang na-encounter ganina. Okay? Identifiers. Okay? So, when you say identifiers, these are user-defined. So, when you say user-defined, it is really up to you, okay, nga ikaw may mo compose sa imuhang identifier. Okay? Now, let's read some of the description of how to create an identifier. Okay? So an identifier is a name used to identify a variable, a function, or any other user-defined item. Okay? So I do believe we are familiar with what we call as variable, di ba? So sa math, we often use that. Okay? Solve for x. Okay? Sa kadugay-dugay sa panahon, problema jud kay na si x, di ba no?
Sana
Wa
all
jud
may
ka move
X.
on. Mao din nagi problema sa uban ganahang maka-experience og naay x. Kay ang uban forever naman char. Okay? So anyway, mao na si variable. Okay? Mao na gitawag siyang variable because it can change its value. Okay? So how do we create an identifier? A valid identifier that will be recognized by C. As stated there, an identifier starts with a letter. Okay? Be it capital or small. And that letters would span from A to Z. Okay? Or an underscore. Okay? So after starting with a letter or underscore, it could be followed by numbers or more letters. Okay? So dili pwede you start your identifier with a number. Okay? Always na siya mag-start with a letter or pwede pod underscore. Okay? So C does not allow punctuation characters. Okay? So punctuation characters such as at sign, dollar sign, unsa pa maning sign na diri. Uh, mga symbols, characters, special characters nga naa diri sa ato ang keyboard. Okay? So dili na siya allowed as identifier because some of those could be used as an operator, di ba? Like plus minus, okay? The ampersand, the pipeline, okay? Those are later on used as operators as what we have seen before with pseudocode. Natay gitawag nga arithmetic operator, relational operators, ug logical operators. Okay? Now, when you are creating identifiers, okay, bisag makapalabi kag pataas, take note lang, only the first 63 characters of the identifier is significant. The rest of the identifier characters will not make sense na for the program. And I do believe di man siguro kaabot og ingana katasa ang ato ang character no or ay ato identifier 63 characters. Okay, usa naman na ka sentence. Okay? So though I told you that when you create variables, you do it so that it will be self-documenting. Okay? So mayingon tag self-documenting, that means at a glance makita day nimo unsay pasabot ana nga variable. Ayaw lang pud patas ang mura kag nag define og usa ka sentence. Okay? Using 63 characters. Okay? So make it short. Okay? So as stated, C is case sensitive. Just like our demonstration ganina when we use printf. Okay? Lahi ang capital P, lahi ang small letter P. Okay? Na duplicate use of keywords are not allowed. Okay? So dapat ang imuhang keywords or kaning gitawag nato nga identifiers should be unique. Okay? Now there will be examples later wherein makabantay mo that when you create identifiers, pwede nimo mabalik-balik. Okay? So there is a rule on that. So we will be discussing that later. So as shown on the example below, kanang naka-yellow, those are examples of acceptable identifiers that you could create. So as you can see, every identifier starts with a letter, or it could also start with an underscore. After a letter, okay, or an underscore, it could be followed by another letter or an underscore, or it could be a number. Okay? So one thing is for sure, dili mag-start ang identifier og number. Okay? So here again are some examples of valid and invalid, okay, identifiers. So as what we can see there sa A, it is a valid identifier, but it is a poor choice of identifier. Okay? Kay what is A? Okay? Hilig biya kay tana, di ba? When doing or when solving problems in math, when you create a variable, magsugod sa A, followed by B, C, D, E, F, G, until maabot og Z. Ikabot og Z niya, kailangan pag-identifier AA, AB, AC. Hantod mahurot again ang alphabet. Okay, so don't do that, please. Okay, use an identifier name which is, again, self-documenting. That at a glance, makabaw dayon ka, what is that identifier for? Okay, so again, there, as you can see, underscore a system name. Okay, so it is a valid identifier. It starts with an underscore then followed by a letter. Okay, so napud tay underscore bull. Okay, so as stated on the comment, okay, again, it is valid because it started with an underscore. Okay, so napud tay int underscore mean. Okay, so as what we can see there, again, valid na siya. Okay, however, that is a system defined value. As much as possible, you don't use it. But again, if there are any conflicts with using identifiers, it will easily be detected once you compile your program because it will give you a syntax error. So, di ra kay ta makuyawan ana. Okay? So, here are just some of the invalid identifiers. Okay? Naggamit ka og special characters, dollar sign. The second one, you are using a number for the first character. Okay? For the third one, nagamit ka og hyphen, which is again not permitted. Okay? The fourth one, student number. Okay? So a space is considered as one of those special characters, which is again not permitted. Okay? And the last one, int. Nganong int is invalid man. Okay? It starts with a letter and looks perfectly okay. Unfortunately, int is one of those so-called keywords that is used by the system. Okay, so again, when you use keywords, when you refer to keywords, these are identifiers nga naa nay purpose sa C nga compiler. Okay, nana na siya or gidefine na siya daan unsay gamit niya. So that means you cannot use that anymore. Okay? So mao na ang keywords. So later kanang keywords nga vocabulary ninyo would increase ra na siya as you learn more about programming in C. Okay? So, kung di kahuwat, you could always browse this table of keywords that you can usually encounter when coding in C. Okay? So, probably usas sa mga gamit kay ninyo diri guys. Okay? Kani, int. Okay? You also have the void. Okay? You also have this so-called float. You'll also have this so-called wa man maapil ang uban. Okay? So, kani, while, as you can see, na ay while nga keyword nga gigamit, which is, kung nakahinumdum mo, did under sa loop na structure. Okay? Naapoy for, which is again under sa loop nga structure. Naapoy if, which is under sa selection na structure. Okay? Naapoy else. Okay? So, napod tay do. Okay? So, again, if you accidentally use one of these keywords, wala ray problema kay when you compile, ma-detect ra man na siya nga di pwede ninyo gamiton as an identifier. Okay? Unfortunately, during exam, you cannot use your compiler. So there's no way of detecting those keywords. Okay? So kailangan lang jud nato og i-familiarize ourselves about these keywords. Okay? So So moving forward again, okay, white spaces in C. Unsa tong white spaces? Again, when you talk about white space, these are simply blank stubs, new lines. Okay, so those are again irrelevant in the C programming language. Okay, so typically di radyod na siya i-appeal o recognize when you do your compilation. Bisan pag imuhang number of spaces or tabs ni span pa na siya 1 kilometer, wa nay problema. It will be considered as a single space ra. Okay? So take note lang, okay, when you are trying to create your program, there must be at least one white space character between your tokens. Okay? Again, when you talk about tokens, it could be the reserved word and your si tawag nato ani identifier. Okay? So with semicolon, wala ra na siya problema nga mo musikit sa imong identifier. Okay? But if you want to be sure, pwede ra pod nimo butangag one space. Okay? So very important you put the space, especially if you are working with reserved words and keywords. Kay without the space, the compiler will have a hard time identifying unsa man ning gibutang nimo sa statement. Is this an expression? Is this a command? Or is that simply is an identifier that you have composed? Kay kung moingon ka og int age, usahon ani mo ana, it might be read by the compiler, uy, naghimo siya og identifier. Okay? So para ma-differentiate nato si identifier o kanang si reserved word, you put a space between it. Okay? So in cases like this, for example, mag-create mo og mathematical expression like apples plus orange, okay? So since kabaw naman si compiler nga ang plus sign is an operator and is not part of the identifier, then okay ra na siya, walay space in between. Okay? So kana mailhan man na sa compiler ang mga gitawag nato nga operators or kaning gitawag nato nga assignment operators. So if it is, let's say murag uh, how do you call this, a basic expression, okay, typically pwede ra na kadi magbutang og space between the operators and the identifiers nga imong gigamit. Okay? Kay mailhan ra man na siya sa compiler. Asa si identifier ug asa si operators. Okay? Now, let's talk about this data type. Okay? So we now know a bit about the so-called tokens like the reserved words, okay? How to create identifiers, okay? What white spaces are and how they affect our program. Let's now move to data types, okay? So knowing data types allows us to know more about the so-called reserved words, okay? So when you talk about data types in C, as stated there, okay, it is basically associated with you creating variables or pwede po creating functions. But as of now, let's focus first on the creation of variables. Okay, so when you create a variable, okay, in C, it is very important that you identify what that variable is for and what it represents. Okay? Now in C, natay gitawag nga classifications of types. And one of the classification involves basic types. Under sa basic types, natay gitawag nga integer type o floating point types. Okay? So unsa maning mga integer types? So as what we have discussed earlier, when you talk about integers, these are whole numbers. Okay? When you talk about floating point types, unsa man ang floating point types? These are associated with real numbers. So So when you say real numbers, these are numbers that supports fraction or decimal part. Okay? Then you have the void. Okay? So void di ay nga ato ang gigamit ganina is a type used in C, which is of course, it means nothing, no value. Okay? Wala. Okay? Now, there are also these advanced topics, okay, that will be ambot lag maabot bataan na kanang gitawag nato nga enumerated types. Okay? So, these enumerated types is those types that we as users could actually create. Okay? Mo na gitawag nato nga mga user-defined types. Okay? Kay there's actually no fixed values kung unsa jud ni sila. Kay it is up to the user to create one. Okay? So, I think as of now, murag dili kay ta mag-delve pa ana. Okay? Probably in the future, maagiana ninyo sila. Okay? And we also have these so-called derived types. Okay? That will be making use of pointers, arrays, structures, unions, okay? Which is, again, some of this atuan ang ma-encounter as we move on with our discussion on C programming. For the moment, okay, let's focus here on the basic types. Okay, kaning si integer of floating point type. Okay, so as we begin our journey to coding in C, okay, let's start with the basics. Okay, so the most fundamental data types, okay, natay gitawag nga integers, characters, floating points, double precision floating points. Unsa man ni sila, oy? Okay? Ganina integer raman tog floating point, nganong karon naa na may character ug naa nay double precision floating point. Okay? So, just to give you an overview, when you talk about integers, again, we are referring to whole numbers. Okay? When you talk about characters, okay, unsa man ning mga characters? Do you still remember katong ASCII code, guys? Nga to ang na-discuss earlier. Okay? So, usa sa mga representation for your characters in C. Okay? So, natay gitawag nga ASCII codes. Like for example, kanang mga letters in the alphabet. Okay? Kani inyuhang mga operators nga gipanggamit, arithmetic, logical, relational, or even kaning mga special characters nga naa sa inyong keyboard. Those are all represented as a type character. Okay? Unya, napud tay floating point. Unsa man ning mga floating point? Again, as what I've told you, floating points are those so-called real numbers. Numbers with decimal point. Okay? Nya, napud tay double precision floating point. Okay? So when you say double precision, from the word precision, unsa may mas pasabot ninyo ng precision, guys? Precise. Okay? So when you have this value, 9.68543, og napod kay 9.685432132168578. Okay? Which of the two numbers is more precise? Taas or ubos?
Ubos.
Okay? Nganong nakaingon man ta mas precise ang naa sa ubos? Okay, okay, mas daghag decimal point, no? So that means it is accurate up to pila ka decimal places. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 decimal places mas accurate ni siyang naa sa ubos. And that is precisely what these double precisions are. Double precision floating point are just real numbers but supports more precision. Mo nang gitawag siyang double precision floating point. Kay it can contain more decimal numbers compared sa kaning gitawag nato nga floating point. Okay? So later atoan niya nang i-discuss nganong importante kay ng floating point. Okay, and why do we need a higher precision over it? Okay? So aside from those so-called fundamental data types nga to ang panggamiton, integer, character, floats o kanang gitawag nato nga double, naputi gitawag nga data type modifiers. Okay? So the data type modifiers would include the following keywords: long, short, unsigned, ug signed. Okay? Unsa may gamit aning modifiers. Okay? So stated there, the modifiers preserve the fundamental characteristics of the data type but changes the range of values that can be assigned and also the size of memory required for storing the values. Okay? So again, what are the fundamental characteristics of the data type? Again, for integers, it contains whole number. For characters, it is used to store symbols or or characters from the word itself. Floating point, it is able to store decimal point or real numbers. So those are what we call as fundamental characteristics. But with the so-called data type modifiers, pwede nimo usbon, okay, ang storage or ang range sa values na pwede mabutang. Okay? So modifiers are not data types as indicated there. They cannot be used to declare variables in isolation. That means when you use long or short or the word unsigned lang or int, okay, dili na siya uh, pwede nga siya lang. Usually, it comes with the fundamental data types. Kay as the name implies, it is used to modify the fundamental data types storage capability. Okay? So, bundled na siya si modifier. So, example, as you can see there, you have the data type. Okay? And data type is the integer. The variable name is the A. And the data type modifier is the word unsigned. Okay? So, let's look at this example that we have here. Okay? So, as we look at this example, a table of our integer types, okay? When we talk about int and character, mo ni ato ang gitawag nga fundamental types, okay? So, when you create a variable, guys, okay? These variables created will make use of your computer's memory. As to how big or how small that memory is used by the variable is dictated by the data type. So moingon kag character, guys, it is equivalent to 1 byte. When you talk about integers, it will be making use of 4 bytes. Okay? So ang pangutana is giunsa pagkabaw ang value range. Okay? How did we solve this? Nganong makaingon siya kung 1 byte, you can store up to negative 128 to positive 127. Okay? How was this made possible? Okay? So, take note with characters and integers, kung nakahinumdum mo katong representation nato sa numbers, sa to, number conversion, binary, 1 byte. Unsa kaninang 1 byte, guys? Pila ka bits?
Walo ka book, sir.
8 ka bits. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay? And we know that ang number when represented inside the computer, unsa to? Ang most significant will serve as your sign bit. It is one way to identify if it's the number is a positive or a negative. Okay? So if that is 0 and the rest of the bits are 1, okay? If you convert this into decimal, it will give you 127. Okay? And that is how we got positive 127. Okay? For a 1 byte. Then how about 128? How did we get 128? Okay? What is negative 128? Negative 128 in the computer is read as 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Okay? Nganong na 128 man na siya. Nya, negative pa jud. Okay? Giyon sa ganito na to pagkabaw guys, we use 2's complement. Unsa ganitong 2's complement? Ang 0 mahimong 1, ang 1 mahimong 0, then you add 1. So 1, okay? So when you say plus 1, mubalik na po siya og 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. And this is a negative value. And that is how you got negative 128. Okay? So of course, medyo sakit sa ulo, kay naanay mga numbers, naanay computation, pwede mo magpalaban sa inyong all-time favorite, the calculator. Okay? So, again, as you can see here, if you say negative 128, okay? So that is a negative value. So if you decided that you are to store that as 1 byte, there it is. Okay? So that is negative 128 as you can see. Okay? Ug di ka mulapas ana. Okay? That is the biggest number for a 1 byte nga value. Okay? Now how about int? As you can see, si int, pila na siya ka bytes? 4 bytes. O what is 4 bytes? This is 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? So D word, mao na ang equivalent sa 4 bytes. So let's say if in binary, you type it in such a way that, okay, sakto na ba ni? 1, 2, 3, okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Kuwangan pa ko sa kawan. Boom, there. Okay? So that is 4 bytes. This is the positive range. Okay? So 2, 1, 4, 7, 4, 8, 3, 6, 4, 7. Which is kani, ang positive range. Okay? So for the negative range, that would be 1, 0, 0, 0. Kulang pa. 1, 2, 3. Okay? So that is for the negative range. Okay? Which is again, base dire 2, 1, 4, 7, 4, 8, 3, 6, 4, 8. Okay? So this is how the biggest number for a negative value is stored in an integer. Okay? So let's say mayroon ka negative 1024. Okay? So let's say decimal 1024. Okay? So mo ni siya ang how it is stored in the computer if it is a positive value. If it's a negative value, this is how that value is stored in your computer. Okay? So again, using katong 2's complement. Ang 0 ma 1, ang 1 ma 0, then you add 1 again. Okay? So that's how you do it, guys. Okay? So, kani, unsa man sa ning unsigned? Okay? When you say unsigned, that means when you represent your number, as you can see guys, the positive representation, even though the size is just 4 bytes, mas dako, di ba? 4 billion. Dire, parihara siyag size ang storage but 2 billion rataman. Okay? Does that mean when you use unsigned modifier with int, it will increase the range? Okay, did it increase the range, guys? You will see that the positive range increases, but as you can see again with unsigned int, wala siya'y negative nga value. Puro positive. Okay? So what happened there? Okay? Unsa man din ang signed ug unsigned. And by default day guys, when you don't put here a modifier like unsigned nga word, ang pasabot ani niya by default, this is signed car, signed int. Okay? But the compiler actually understands that nga kung wala kay gibutang nga modifier dire, that is just equivalent to signed car. And this is just equivalent to signed int. Okay, mo nang naa kay negative o positive range. When you use unsigned modifier, ang value representation nimo is puro positive. Okay? Ang concept ana niya guys is something like this. Okay? Okay? So imagine when you talk about bytes, di ba? It is a storage on your memory. And when you say storage, ang capacity niya to store values. Okay? So if let's say this is the positive range, this is the negative range, and this is the 0 nga value. When you say 1 byte, niya naa siya positive negative representation, ang storage nimo looks like this. Okay? Naa siya range para sa positive, naa siya range sa negative. But when you say unsigned, okay, you will have that same storage size, pero ang representation nimo when you say unsigned starts at 0. Wala kay negative nga range. So you can maximize, okay, the values nga pwede nimo mabutang in this data type nga puro positive lang. Okay? Kay there are scenarios man good guys when you do some computations kabaw ka nga puro positive ra imong gamiton. Okay? So instead nga mugamit ka og let's say kaniyo long. Unsa man ning long? Okay? So long is basically just an integer. Okay? Integer na siya with a bigger storage. So take note, ang integer is 4 bytes. When you say long integer, that is 8 bytes. Doble ang ihang capacity. Okay? But of course, if you increase the storage size, that would mean it will eat more memory in your RAM. Okay? So mao ni ang concept guys when you create kaning gitawag nato nga variables and what the data types are used for. Okay? So when you perform computations niya kabaw ka ang range sa values nimo would only range from 0 to 100. Okay? What data type will we use para makasave tag memory? Okay, asa man. What do you think? Okay, so we can use unsigned car. Okay, we can use unsigned car. Okay, so even though 0 to 100 is supported by car, pwede na to ma-maximize ato ang positive range up to 255. Okay, so ingana sad sa programming guys. Usually some programmers don't think about the relevance of data type. Ang huna-hunaon man gud sa ubang programmer, walay kaso, mugamit lang kog long. Para sure ko nga tanang integers pwede niya ma-accommodate. Diba? Kaya ang 0 to 100, masuportan naman na sa long. But the thing is, you are wasting memory. Okay? So, with the memory becoming more cheap, okay, more of our systems has bigger memories. Okay? Maabot na gani og 8 gig, 16 gig. Okay? So mo ng mga programmers na to, wa na sa joy paki. Okay? Trying to lessen the memory being consumed by the program. Okay? Mo nang kita pud mapugos pud ta og sigig upgrade sa ato ang cellphones kay bisag cellphones, di ba? Kung naa kay 1 gig nga cellphone dira, do you think naapakay laing application nga pwede mapadagan? So cellphones before naaray memory gud na nga 512 ug 1 gig, di ba? Pero karong panahon na when you talk about cellphones with 1 gig memory, my God, unsa may mga applications pwede na ko ma-open ani? Okay? Because applications now are very demanding in terms of memory usage. Okay? So namang gay ubang developer wa na maghuna-huna. Okay? If you want to use my application, you adjust padaki ang specs sa imong computer. Okay? However, computer engineers are not trained to be like that. Okay? So we as computer engineers must find ways to maximize the use of our hardware. Okay? So mao na siya guys. Okay? Ang relevance sa data types and how you choose the correct data type for your identifiers. Okay? So again, when talking about integers, these are just data types for whole numbers. Okay? So naa kay option to choose as to whether mugamit kag int, char, short, or long. So take note of the range, guys. Okay? When you use integer, that's 4 bytes. And with integer, you can store numbers from positive 2 billion up to negative 2 billion. However, if your applications um, utilizes only the positive number, then might as well maximize your integer type to use unsigned nga modifier para ma-maximize nimo ang imong range to about 4 billion. Okay? But if you think nga, uy, ang ako ang magamit is from kwan raman 0 to 10,000. So kung 0 to 10,000 ang imuhang gamiton, you could either use unsigned short or short. Okay? Kay nganong short man? Imagine comparing 4 bytes to 2 bytes, di ba? Diri usa ka variable. Sa short, pwede ka duha ka variable ang magamit nimo. Okay? With that amount of space being utilized. Okay? Pero of course, if you are unsure as to pilay range sa values nga dapat i-store nimo sa imong variable, unsay nindot gamiton, guys? If you are unsure, pilay range sa whole number nga i-store nimo sa variable, unsay ato ang gamiton? Unsigned int,
Long, sir.
long, di ba? If you are unsure kay wa ka kabaw, mas dako pa day sa 2 billion. Okay? Ma-short ka kung anhira ka sa int nya, di pa jud ka sure kung nabay positive o negative. But you know whole numbers siya. You use the biggest storage possible. We use long. Okay? So more na guys ang idea on how to choose the correct data types for your variables. Okay? So take note, variables are just like storage. Okay? the bigger the storage size, the more values ang pwede nimong mabutang. Okay? So let's say this is 1 byte. This is 2 bytes. This is 4 bytes. Ug naa kay pinakadako, which is 8 bytes. Okay? Maura na ang idea sa variables. Okay? And the so-called storage size. Okay? So please do take note about that. Okay? So very important ang concept sa kanang storage size when you are becoming programmers. Okay? So again, how do you create a variable for characters? So again, you simply define the data type, okay? And then the variable name. Okay? So how do you store a character on this variable? Okay? So take note, any characters are always enclosed with a single quote. Okay? So if you've remembered katong sa discussion nato before, di ba? Ang A, if you want to store character A, you enclose it with single quote. Okay? And this A, actually when stored in the computer's memory, will be translated into binary bits corresponding to an integer value. Okay? Kung pila ganitong A, okay? Pila tong A sa ASCII code? Okay? So pilay value sa A gani guys sa ASCII code? Okay? So that is around 97. Okay? So when stored in the computer's memory, it is stored as a value of 97, which is again masulod ra jud siya sa character. Okay? Kay for character types, it can store information ranging from -128 to +127. So kanang letter A nga small, 97 man na siya, masudra jud na siya sa storage nga character. Okay? So again, with characters, don't forget single quotes. Okay? So even if mubutang kag numeric nga 1, when stored inside a character storage, it will not be stored as 1. Again, there is an appropriate ASCII code for that. Okay? So if you again look at this, okay, mo ni nakanindot karon sa internet. Okay? You have this ASCII table. Okay? So if we look for numbers, let's say 1, as you can see, it will be stored as a value of 49. Or in hex, that is stored as 31. Okay? So, mo na siya guys. Okay? So, how will the compiler know if it is a number or a character? Depende sa data type. Okay? So, tanaw niya, uy, ang data type is letter. So, that means if I read that in the memory that is stored as an integer man, I will convert that into ASCII code to really show what its value is. Okay? So, take note, anything that you store inside the computer are all written in binaries, in whole numbers. Okay? So, even katong mga decimal points, they are also written in binary as integers or whole numbers. Okay? So again, here is a representation of your integer types nga nagamit og modifiers. Okay? So naatay short int, kung magtanaw ka, ang storage space niya is smaller compared sa int. Kay nga naman, short int only occupies, pila ganito guys? 2 2 bytes. Int is 4 bytes. Okay? Usually ang long that is 8 bytes. O kanang long ambot lang kung unsa nga compiler mo support ana. But if you say long, probably it's longer than long int. 'Di ba? So maybe it's around 16. Okay? So we need to check that using kaning gitawag nato nga size of operator. Okay? So later I will show you how to use this size of operator para makita nato sa tuang system as to whether how your compiler treats this specific storage nga naay gitawag nato nga modifier. Okay? So again, just to make sure nga ang imuhang presumption is correct, you can use the size of operator to get the actual size of the variable that you have created using the following data type. Okay? And using the following modifiers for your data type. Okay? So again, as what we've told earlier, when you say int, that by default is 4 bytes. If you use short, it will make the storage smaller. If you use long, it will make the storage bigger. But still, it will act as a storage for integers. If you add another modifier like signed or unsigned, by default, if you don't see the word signed there on your data type, it is by default signed nga integer. If you want to specify nga puro positive na siya, you really need to write that word, unsigned. Okay? So, again, here is an example, okay, of how you might be able to determine, okay, the size of your data types. Okay? So, let me just explain the code. Okay? So again, as you can see here, guys, we have added more preprocessor directives. Aside from your stdio.h, we have actually added stdlib, limits, and float. The reason for that is because some of these kaning gitawag nato nga keywords, okay, or identifiers, as you can see, wala man ta mag-create ana ang identifier diri. Pero nganong gigamit man na siya? These are actually identifiers that were created inside this library. Okay? So for us to be able to use these identifiers, we need to add these libraries. Okay? Because if we don't add these libraries, this program here will not work because it will not be able to identify these values. Okay? Nya, unsa maning gitawag nato nga %d. This is something new. Okay? So we know that anything that is enclosed in a double quote are string that will be displayed on the monitor. We know what /n is. /n is used to, unsa ganito? Create a new line. Okay? Unsa man ni si %d. Okay? So %d, guys, okay, is what we call as a format specifier that is used to display integers. Okay? Integers such as the value being held by this variable. Okay? So as you can see, medyo nausab ang syntax ni printf. Instead na after sa double quote, imuha ng isirado with a closing parenthesis din semicolon, as you can see, there is this comma placed after the double quote. And this %d simply indicates that the value of this variable character b will be displayed in this position. Okay? Maor na pasabot ana. Okay? So let's say another %d as you can see here. Diba? Then after sa double quote, naa na sad ning gitawag nato nga identifier. An identifier which was declared or created from one of these libraries. So ang value aning short mean is actually displayed here on the portion nga naay %d. Okay? So let me just give you an example lang. Okay? So here in our embarcadero. Okay? So let's say create a variable. A variable is an integer. And that variable integer, tawgon natong si A. Butangan lang nato og let's say pila man. Pila may sud sa wallet ninyo ron. Zero jud.
100, sir.
Pod. Butangan lang sad ko ni 550. Oh, kana lang para di pud kay makaluluoy. Okay? So layo para baya kayong sweldo niya 550 na lang nabili na ko unsaon na lang. Okay? I have pila pa 9 more days to go. Okay? So you use printf. Okay, so as stated, global quote to print the string. Okay? I will say A is equal to, okay? I put %d. So %d will serve as my so-called format specifier. Okay? Let me just change this na lang. I'll just put here 97. Okay? So I'll put there %d. Format specifier. So may pasabot ng format specifier. That means when it gets the value of A in the memory, it will display the value of A using the integer format. Okay? So again, as the printf command gets the value of A, it prints it in this location. A location that utilizes the format specifier for integer, which is %d. So that means ang A nga variable i-display na niya as an integer. Okay? So running the code, okay, will display this. Okay? So A, as what we see, is displayed here on this position. Okay? So ana siya gi-display after sa equal sign. Okay? Tanawa guys ha. What if I modify this so-called format specifier? Instead of displaying A as an integer, I will display A as a character. So the format specifier for displaying A as a character is C. Okay? So tanaw na to, ang 97, unsa may value ana niya if displayed as a character. Okay? There it is. Okay? Now as what you can see, ang 97 di nga value inside the memory when displayed as a character is equivalent to letter A. Okay? So what if I change this to 98? Unsay ma-display diri guys? What letter?
Small b, sir.
Okay. So the letter will be displayed there is small b. Okay? Maunay gamit sa kanang gitawag nato nga format specifier. Okay? All your data in the memory are stored in binary. Using this format specifier, your data will be displayed differently depende sa format nga imong gigamit. So, if again I use D, that data nga 98 is stored or displayed as a number. Okay? So, okay na? Did you understand na what %d is used for? Or %c perhaps? Okay? So, for floating point, unsa may gamito nato for floating point? We use %f. Okay? So even though floating point still is a number, as you can see, that value 98 inside your computer is, if displayed, okay, as a floating point value, it is equivalent to 0. Okay? Nganong na 0 man si 98? Again, based on the floating point standard. Okay? Sa IEEE floating point standard. Okay? Mo nang 0 ang nigawas dira. Kay that actually means kanang 97, if stored in the computer's memory, gamay kay na siya nga numero na ana somewhere here. 0.00000 something nga di na niya ma-display because it can only display up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 kabuok decimal point characters. Okay? So, mauna siya guys. Okay? Ang gamit sa format specifier nga nakita nato diri. Okay? So, I'll just leave this na lang for you to explore. Okay? Just copy this once I post the notes on Google Classroom para makita po ninyo ang range sa values. Okay? So, let's talk about floating point. Okay? So, sa floating point, as what you can see, okay, it utilizes, again, 4 bytes for float, 8 bytes for double. For long double, it's 10 bytes. But again, for some computers, it might not support this type, kaning long double. Okay? So, to make sure as to unsa joy size niya, you make use of size of operator. So, let me just show you guys how the size of operator is utilized. Okay? Size of operator, unsay spelling? Size of. Okay? Then you put it inside the semicolon. Semicolon inside the parenthesis. Ang kuhaan nimo og size. Okay? So I will display here the size of a variable. Okay? So I will display it in decimal. Okay? So pila may size ni A. So A is unsa ganito? Integer. So if I run the code, makita nimo diri. We know that A is 98, but take note, ang ato ang gi-display is not the value of A, but kung pilay size ni A. Okay? And this is what this function is for. It takes in the variable and it tries to read kung pilay size gikonsumo ni A sa memory. Okay? So mo nay 4 ni gawas. Okay? So how about when you say unsigned? Okay? So again, if you run that, are you changing the size when you put unsigned? Are you changing the size allocation for the memory? No. You only change the range when you say unsigned. So ang size niya sa memory 4 lang gihapon. Okay?
Pag may disiplina, aanhin natin tuwid na daan.
Kuyawan ni nila eh. Robin Padilla. Ala eh.
Kalokohan. Ang walang disiplina. Disiplinahin.
Sa may supporter ni Robin Padilla derida.
So na. Wala, karon mo kita ang lagi.
Wala, karon pa kita kami, wajud mi kita daw mi. Okay? So anyway, kung
Oo. Ang laki.
Hoy, Sparsha. Paki-off lang sa mic please. Bisag nami laing madunggan na di wholesome. Okay? So again, kung magtanaw ta, here is an example wherein wala dawata ang long nga modifier sa ato ang compiler. Okay? So expected unta when you add the long keyword for integer, this becomes 8 bytes. But it seems like wala. Okay? So kung long lang, okay? So again, as what we can see, there's no long data type that we could use with this compiler. Okay? maximum of 4 bytes lang. Okay? How about ang short? Would it make the variable int, short int? Okay, so again, short int. Okay, you don't need to put int na there. Kaya si compiler makarecognize na when it says short, it's referring to integers. Okay? So again, running the code, as what you can see, pilay size, 2. So ang short integer is available for this compiler. It was able to reduce the size of the 4-byte integer to 2 bytes na lang. Okay? And that could be very helpful, guys, when you are trying to create an application nga para sa mga computer nga low specs. Okay? So i-maximize ninyo ang memory consumption. Okay? So mao na siya for, again, using the size of operator. Now, again, talking about floating point types as what we can see here. Okay? Ang floating point types, even though as you can see guys, it is equivalent to 4 bytes. Okay? Kung 4 bytes, dapat ang range pud unta niya is pari-pareha og decimal, di ba? Pero as what we can see here, lahi ang range for floating points. For a 4-byte floating point, you could store their numbers from 1.2 raised to the power of negative 38 o 3.4 raised to the power of positive 38. Okay? So this is for the negative range, this is for the positive range. Essentially, when you talk about float, you can have as long as 6 decimal places nga kaya niyang i-interpret. Okay? Now for double, as you can see, mas dako ang range sa double. 2.3 raised to the power of negative 308 o 1.7 raised to the power of positive 308. Okay? And it can support up to 15 decimal places. Okay? So for example, if you are trying to store a value for money, di ba? Nya na kay mga interest na computation, which one would you be using for your application? Float or double? Okay? So kung ang kliyente nimo mga milyonaryo, bilyonaryo, you better use double for that. Kay kung mogamit kag float, okay, imagine kanang mga 0.0001 nga precision, pwede nakapatyon ana sa tag-iya sa account. Okay? Kay mga kag ang kwarta sa imuhang client is a billionaire. Okay? Nya sa computation nimo sa interest, okay? Up to 6 decimal places rabi ang precision. Imagine dako na kay mawagtang kung ingon kag 0.000001 nga interest, di ba? Pila na naka-load nimo sa imong cellphone. Okay? So mo na guys, okay? Very important. Okay? Ang precision. Okay? So also take note, okay, when you are using different data types, the data types would also be the one defining how the values or your variables would behave when you perform arithmetic operations. Okay? So let's give you an example. Okay? Let's say, for example, we have an integer. Okay? So let's say very small number lang. Kana. And we have integer b. Okay? So let's say that's 3. Okay? So when you perform a divided by b, okay, pilay ato ang value. Okay? A divided by b. So as you can see, I'm just using the variable instead of the actual number. Okay? So ang variable akong gibutang diri to perform the division operation. Okay? So take note, A and B are both integers. When I run my code, okay, pila expected ninyong output, guys? Okay? 10 divided by 3 ang mugawas, which is 3.3333. But ang nigawas, 3 lang. Okay? So ayaw ing nang bugo ang computer. Di man ikabaw mo divide ang computer. Oy, laliman kag 10 divided by 3 kung mugamit ko calculator, that's 3.333. Di na ko mugamit og si, oy, bugo man na, sir. Okay, ayaw in town. Please do take note. The computer or the compiler is only reacting to the code that you were doing. Okay? So kung nasayop siya compute, dili na sayop sa computer kung sayop sa programmer. Okay? So take note, we are using integers. Okay? So when you talk about integers, guys, ang result nga i-display niya dira would only be, unsa na siya? Would only be integers pod. Dili siya ka-represent sa numero as decimal numbers or floating point numbers. Okay? So if you want nga mo display siya dira og 3.3, okay, you need at least one of the operands to be a float. So let's say, okay, I'll make B into a float. Okay? So when you run your code again, what happened? Nabugo na jud ang computer. Buguan na jud aning computer. Laliman kang 10 divided by 3, nahimo namang negative hinuon ang answer niya. Perti pa yung dakuas numero. Sir, di na jud ko undang na ko aning klasiha, sir. Makabugo man ni. Okay, again, the computer is only reacting to your code. Gi-display man nimo siya diri as decimal point. So i-display ra na niya unsay sulod sa memory. Di ba? So remember, okay, katong IEEE floating point standard. Okay? Unsa ganito? IEEE 754 unsa to? Floating point calculator. Okay? Let me show you na lang this one. Okay? So take note. Okay? In this website, okay, if you have entered that value 3.333333333, okay, your values is stored in this manner. Okay? So the computer is just simply reacting to how you stored your data. Nga naa diri. Mao na ang iyang gi-display diri nga numero. Okay? So if you want to display the result of this in a decimal or floating point format, you use the format specifier F. Okay. Sige daw, try na to. Okay? So as you can see, bright raman day ang computer mo, patuo ra pud di ay sa akong instruction nga ihatag. Okay? So that's why, guys, we really need to know a bit more about syntax and data types and how to properly display our data. Kay when you store your data in your computer, they are stored in a similar fashion. They are stored in terms of ones and zeros. And how we interpret those data and how we read those data would matter on how we display it on screen. Okay? So very important jud kaayo nga imuhang mahibaw-an kung unsa nang data type nga imuhang i-display ug unsay format specifier ang imuhang gamiton to display those data. Okay? So di ba nakita nato bitaw no wagud ko giusab dire. I simply change how the data was displayed. Okay? Okay, so for now, anha lang sa siguro ta, okay, with decimals or the floating point and integers, okay? So next meeting, katong ato ang gidiscuss before nga unsa ganito, algorithm and pseudocodes, okay? Ato atong i-implement, guys, okay? We will be implementing this one. We have already implemented this as a pseudocode and as a flowchart. Okay, next meeting we will implement this in C program. Okay, so far ang ato ang nakatunan pa for now is using the data types and how to print it on screen. Okay, so next meeting we'll also be learning about how to read the input from the user. Okay, so again, before we go, can we turn on your cameras? Okay.